So Stacy Rebich-Hespanha, I met her a few months ago. I guess it was 6 months ago, when I was working on what's called a sprint. It was sponsored by the UC Davis Office of President, and they were trying to investigate this concept of incorporating fossil-free living labs on the 10 UC Davis campuses. And Stacy and I were sitting on the same panel, or I guess sprint, and we were trying to figure out what is a fossil-free living lab? What are the things that make a good, make for a successful fossil-free living lab if you were to have it? What kinds of projects fall into that category? What's the pathway to get there? And are there real benefits, or what are the benefits that could come from a living lab? And I think one of the main things we did, and Stacy had a pretty big hand in this, was kind of defining what is a fossil-free living lab. And then over the past weeks and months, her and I and Isabella have been discussing some of the things that can help lead to a successful living lab. And she'll be presenting looking at a few of the different cases as we move forward. She is an interdisciplinary behavioral scientist. She specializes in systems design and the intersection of organizational culture, social justice, and environmental sustainability. She has a PhD in geography, emphasis in cognitive science from UC Santa Barbara. She worked at UC Santa Barbara's National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis. She taught environmental data visualization at the Brent School, and she now is a co-founder and president of Flourish Local, which is an entrepreneurial systems design project with a focus on reimagining the food system to be more local, sustainable, and just. And what I like about working with Stacy is that, as a boneheaded engineer, she is forcing me to broaden my view and focus on what either makes success and how do you create successful networks and groups. So I do appreciate that about Stacy. So I am just gonna hand it over to her now.
All right, thanks so much, Kurt, for the introduction, and thank you all for coming this morning. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to talk with you about some of the things that I've been working on over the past years. Kurt mentioned our joint effort earlier this year, but the truth is that I've come to where I am on this project and on this topic through collaboration with many amazing people, and I'm going to try to recognize all of the contributions from this big group of people who have been working on living labs, and especially within the UC system. And today I'm going to highlight a few of the projects that are going on, in particular in the UC system, because that is the area of this work that I'm most familiar with. And I do just want to recommend right up front, in case I forget later, some of you who have been involved in these projects or led them may be on this meeting or at this meeting. And if I say anything that misrepresents your project or I have a misunderstanding, I definitely am open to you coming in during the comment part of this talk and setting the record straight or adding additional perspective on that. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and share my presentation. Okay, so in collaboration with Kurt and Isabella, we came up with a theme and a topic for this. And what we ended on is this idea of living labs as collaborative innovation projects. And with a particular focus for this today's meeting on fossil-free living labs. So I'll just give a tiny bit more background than what Kurt mentioned related to my background and my interest in how I got involved in working on these projects. For the past 15, 20 years, I have been evolving my understanding of organizations and how to design systems and organizations that work and that produce more socially just and environmentally sustainable outcomes. I'm really into data and I like diverse data. I like qualitative, quantitative data. And I think there's a lot of value to be gained from data. And that really helps me participate in these ideas of living labs, where the focus is on collecting data and helping to understand systems. More recently, I've really gotten interested in social innovation and strategies for social innovation, and I think living labs are a really good example of a social innovation strategy. And I am just really interested in visual communication. I teach on that topic, and I think there is a lot of potential for using visualization to encourage further development of ideas related to things like living labs. My involvement at UCSB is now fairly minimal, but I jumped out of academia about 6-7 years ago to start working in food systems because I love food and I think there are lots of great challenges out there. So I am kind of shepherding my own living lab project at the moment. So I have some physical infrastructure in a shared commercial kitchen and a warehouse. I'm working on other organizational elements like legal structures for cooperatives and community investment. And I'm also interested in implementing technology in that space. So new tools for local small food businesses and also tools to help promote sustainability, especially with respect to food waste and packaging waste. So I'm not going to say anything more about that, but just to let you know that that's kind of where I am now. And all of the things that I talk about today are applicable both to specifically fossil-free projects, but also many other projects in the social and environmental innovation space. Okay, so before I start off, I do just want to mention that this work that I'm presenting today is building on many projects that have been contributed to by many people, and 3 documents in particular, which I've linked here in the presentation. My first involvement here in this project was through a working group project that happened at the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis at UCSB. That was co-led by Roger Bales, the group lead, and Lisa Liam-Bruni and I. And we had a quite large group, 32 working group members that included a wide spectrum of UC community members. We did quite a bit of data analysis and collection. And in the end, we recommended a community engagement strategy for the UC system related to decarbonization. And I draw quite a bit from this on the discussion of barriers and opportunities for living labs that I'm going to talk about today. The second one is an extension of that working group report. After we wrapped up the working group stage of that project, Roger Bales and I continued to work with the topic and with the data, and we presented that in the form of this paper. And what we did in that process was really explore how this idea of living labs intersects with socio-technical innovation, and highlighted the potential for living labs to help respond to socio-technical innovation challenges. So that also is a source for quite a bit of the content here. And then the last thing is this sprint project that Kurt and I collaborated on. This was organized by the UC Office of the President under the UC Global Climate Leadership Council, and specifically the Pathways to Fossil-Free UC Task Force. And Kurt talked a little bit about this already, but I just wanted to point it out here, and that the presentation that we put together at the end of that project is also available online, and it informs the discussion here of the definition of living labs. So building on all of that, I'm going to start immediately on the charge that was given to me when I accepted the opportunity to give this presentation, and that is to define a fossil-free living lab. And I had a great start because that was one of the things we developed in our sprint project. So I have taken out here exactly the definition that we agreed upon at the end of that group, which is fossil-free living laboratory is a mutually beneficial partnership, something like a program, project, or course that is focused on fossil fuel reduction. And it's a collaboration between campus operations, programs, or administration, and the research and teaching enterprise. And that sustains the core of the university's sustainability mission. So with this, I'm just going to point out that we articulated this definition specifically around fossil-free, but the key elements are relevant both to fossil-free and to living labs in other areas. These are partnerships that can take various forms, but they virtually always involve collaboration because these are things that happen in collaboration with people who are quite different or who have access to different resources than we do. And interestingly, we outlined the campus operations, the programs or administration, and research and teaching. So kind of 4 different areas. And through our work with that group, we came up with this definition. But being the way that I am, I thought, well, probably I should expand beyond what we said, because we should be taking into account all the work that so many other people have been doing about living labs and defining them. And so I thought, okay, what am I going how am I going to summarize what people have defined a living lab as? And my initial idea was to get help with gathering some definitions and creating a word cloud, very similar to the word cloud you saw earlier. And I am going to take a tiny little side trip down a rabbit trail here just to tell you how I got to this point. I've created a lot of visualizations like this because I work with text and machine learning analysis of text. But I didn't have time for that sort of thing for this presentation, but I have been working with an AI, Claude, and I asked Claude to gather some definitions of living labs from his project knowledge and to generate a word cloud for me. And Claude failed terribly at generating the word cloud. But he did gather this information about living labs, and through a series of discussions about how to best represent those definitions, Claude suggested that we do something that I spent years doing for my dissertation, which is a topic model analysis of that text. So we worked together to create something in one day that I spent years on during my dissertation, with the caveat that this is not a real topic model output. This is, I call it a faux LDA topic model, but it is a great way to get insight into a body of documents like what is useful for the purposes of this presentation. So through that work with Claude, I came up with 6 different areas that are usually discussed in the context of living lab definitions. And one is physical infrastructure. The second is innovation and experimentation. The third, collaboration and engagement. The fourth is a focus on sustainability. Fifth, learning and education. And sixth, research and implementation. And those are listed in the order of their prominence across 100 living lab definitions that I gathered to inform this visualization. So jumping away from that for a moment, I'm going to talk about how our group visually represented what a living lab is. So through the Sprint project, we came up with a figure that attempted to represent visually what a living lab is. And we have 3 overlapping circles of education, research, and operations. And our group, based on much work that has come before, articulated that this living labs happen when those areas of operation intersect. The thing that didn't show up as much in the broader ideas about living labs that I found out in the literature is this part that I just moved to the side, which is administration and institutional commitments. So we recognized within our group that background, the context in which living labs are taking place is a really important element of the living lab and can make a living lab possible or not, can also make it successful or less successful. For the moment, though, I'm setting that to the side. We will return to that in a moment to talk more about the elements of our definition that align really well with what I found in the literature. And those three areas are education, research, and operations. And the overlap of those areas is actually what we consider to encapsulate living lab activities. So there are basically three areas of overlap, the little petals around the center. So those can be overlaps in activities between education and research, between research and operations, or between education and operations. And then, of course, there are projects that do it all. They have all of those areas of overlap. And I'm going to talk in just a moment about different types of projects and how they might fall under this definition. But basically within the area of education, when education activities overlap with research, these are often things like applied research projects for students. And when education overlaps with operations, this can look like classes interacting with some facilities project, some operations staff on a campus. When research overlaps with operations, this usually involves, or almost certainly involves, participants beyond students who are doing research, capturing the outcomes of that research and disseminating beyond the classroom. In terms of operations, I like that we kept instead of saying facilities, for example, our phrasing is focused on operations. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about why I think that is important. But operations can include things like the physical facilities, but also things that are more intangible and beyond the scope of the physical environment of the campus. So as a result of our work in the sprint, we came up with this idea of a kind of typology of projects. On the top row here, you can see there are living lab projects that really focus on the intersection of two of those areas, but don't comprehensively cover all the possible types of activities that could happen in a living lab. And these types of projects are a really good place to start for those who are interested in getting a living lab going and looking to take on a doable project. The kind of hidden part behind thinking about this in the abstract is that all of these areas of overlap represent collaborations. And the more diverse collaborations you need to incorporate, the more challenges there are, good challenges, but challenges nonetheless, to making a project successful. More mature projects may add additional activities that bring them into a more complex type of living lab project. And mature projects or extremely well-funded projects from the beginning eventually generally look like this, where there are all sorts of activities going on, lots of participants, lots of collaborations, working in all of these areas. So just by way of example, I wanted to point out a few of the living lab examples that we discussed during our sprint project. These are actually slides from that sprint slide deck that I linked to earlier. And this one is a lucky choice because Kurt already described what's going on at UC Davis, so I don't really need to focus on that here, but that project has lots of different activities going on, covering all of the areas of our living lab definition. So I would consider it a very mature living lab project that has a lot of knowledge embedded, a lot of strategy that has been implemented to help reach the full realization of a living lab. Other projects that haven't had as much time in development or as much time to bring on collaborators might focus on just a couple of those areas. And the Living Lab project that we talked about in our sprint at UC Santa Cruz is a really fun one, focused on just two of the areas: overlap of education and research, and overlap of education and operations. So this was a particular course focused around the decarbonization station that was being implemented at UC Santa Cruz. So the students interacted during the implementation of that project, and they also did their own research or art projects related to that project. Another one that I thought was really interesting that focuses mostly on the education and research areas amongst that petaled flower that we developed in our group is the synthesis program at 7th College. And I think this is a really interesting program to highlight because it focuses more explicitly on that organizational context that I talked about earlier that is not as well integrated into our ideas about what a living lab is, even though I'm going to spend most of the rest of this presentation arguing about how important it is to do that and what the benefits are of outcomes when we focus on the institutional context for the living labs. So that's a perfect jump-off project to segue into expanding our definition of what a living lab is. So I mentioned before that most of the definitions of living labs that I found online focused on these three areas of education, research, and operations, and intersections between those activities. But our group also identified this, which we called administration and institutional commitments. And we think it is important to make sure that that is recognized. The organizational context is really important for enabling or expanding these projects. And organizations actually are where social innovation can happen. And you may be asking, well, what is the relationship between social innovation, or why is social innovation an important goal in the context of fossil-free living labs? And what I want to suggest to you is that for a long time, we've been thinking about energy systems transformation as primarily a technical problem. And many other social issues related to technology, we tend to focus on the technology a lot, which is absolutely important. But sometimes we neglect to notice that those technologies are actually embedded in our culture, in our organizations, and a purely technical solution does not address those dependencies between technology that we're looking to phase out and the organizations and the society in which it is embedded. So I am not going to argue the whole of why we need to think about challenges like fossil-free campuses as socio-technical problems. We address that in the paper that I linked to. So if you're interested in hearing what we and other people have to say about that, I encourage you to go check that out. I'll share just a little bit about my thoughts about that here in just a moment. But let's look then at social innovation. So I think this is important to think about in the context of living labs. And so I want to give a little bit more background about what we're talking about when we're talking about social innovation. So social innovation is a novel solution to a social problem that is more effective, efficient, sustainable, or just than existing solutions. That's the definition that we used in the paper that I linked to at the beginning. Of course, we were drawing on a lot of research from other people. So I will also point out some of the other authors who have talked about social innovation and things that they think are important characteristics. So one is social benefit, that the value from a social innovation accrues primarily to society rather than to private individuals. So this is a different context for thinking about innovation than we often do when we think about technical innovation, technological innovation, technology transfer. We talk about benefit to society, but those types of innovation often direct value to certain individuals over others. So social innovation, we're really talking about this shared benefit from an innovation. It's also inclusive. So one characteristic would be that it's impossible to exclude others from the benefit of a true social innovation, and that a true social innovation will have a zero marginal cost of additional people benefiting from that. A third area that I think is really important is that social innovation alters perceptions, behaviors, and structures. So it means that social innovations cause us to change our routines, change how we use resources, how authority structures function, and address beliefs about the technology or the broader system into which an innovation is introduced. So that is kind of the view of social innovation from literature, from people who are thinking about that. But I also decided that I should see what Claude can help me do, looking at definitions of social innovation that are out there. So kind of the broader view. And just as I did before, I looked at the 6 main themes that emerged from these. And I'm going to do a deeper comparison of the two to kind of show you how I think living labs and social innovation are really connected. But just running through the top level ideas that came out: integration and systems, social justice and equity, technological solutions, community engagement, institutional transformation, and knowledge and learning. And if we step through those just one by one, this shows an area of strong overlap between social innovation and living labs, where community engagement or collaboration and engagement are really a focus of both areas of thought, and also knowledge and learning. While there are some variations, they share these in common. What I think is interesting are these areas of distinction. So let's look at the living laboratory first. Living labs are focused often on sustainability. That's a dominant theme in those discussions, different forms of sustainability. And they're really grounded in physical infrastructure and testing, so experimentation. And this is a contrast with the social innovation approach to thinking about these same sorts of things. So the focus area for social innovation is often social justice or forms of equity. And it is more of a systems thinking approach focused on institutional transformation. So less about experimentation and more about design. Another area where there are parallels, similar but distinct ways of thinking: living laboratories are really focused on experimentation, as we discussed before. The social innovation approach to solving the same types of problems is a much more holistic, systems-based approach. So again, coming back to design with a focus on changing organizations as opposed to changing technologies. So social innovation sees technologies as a strategy for creating or designing this change. On the other hand, living laboratories see research and implementation and testing on the ground as a way to move forward. And I think that these different ways of seeing the challenge and possible pathways are complementary in amazing ways. So we can enrich the definition of living laboratories by incorporating this social innovation lens. And in fact, that is what our group ended up doing by adding this big circle behind representing the administration and institutional commitments. To refer to that kind of evolved version of the living lab, Roger and I used the term collaboratory, and we use that in our working group report as well, focusing on the fact that it's not just the physical infrastructure, but also the organizational infrastructure that we are working in order to develop these innovations. So really quickly, why do we need fossil-free living laboratories or collaboratories? One is that we face a socio-technical challenge for the reasons I mentioned before. We and our human organizations are tied to our technologies. Second, we need to understand system-level transformation. So the big picture of how things work, trying them out, learning, and developing that design. We need to test that out. It's difficult to do that in the absence of trying things out. And because we are set up to share our understanding either through educational programs or through research dissemination, we have the chance to multiply our impact when we share our understanding. And living labs are a great way for us to leverage what we already do, teaching and research, into the area of social impact. And why are universities really good sites for this? One is that we have expertise that is both deep and varied, deep and diverse across disciplines, across sectors. Universities are kind of like little cities in many ways. They are relatively large scale often, and they have systems of high complexity, both governance systems, technical systems, sociocultural systems, and that makes them a really good place to do these experiments or tests or design studies. The last one, which I think is really important and sometimes missed, is that we are, as universities, because what means success is high quality educational outcomes or experiences and research outcomes, we're kind of protected from some of the pressures that other types of organizations in society have. It's not completely about the bottom line of the innovation that comes out of a project, because we are achieving the primary goals of universities when we create these amazing educational opportunities and research projects. Okay, the barriers, there are always barriers, and this refers back to our working group project where we gathered all of that data. I'm going to focus on just the three that I think come up over and over again. One is finite resources, so time and money, there are only so much of them. Sunk costs, especially in energy systems, and a perceived or real competition for resources with education and research missions. Another problem is misaligned incentives. So there's a lack of accountability regarding sustainability commitments and the professional risks for people who contribute to alternative projects that might not generate as much meaningful career promoting outcomes. And then third, and what I'm going to focus on in just the couple of minutes we have left, are inadequate decision systems. So insufficient processes for inclusive deliberation and decision-making, inadequate information sharing, top-down mandates, and just conflicts between control of certain resources, territories, things like that. So I wanted to end with some ideas about how to overcome some of those barriers. And in our paper, we talk about that at kind of the university and institutional level. But here I want to talk about it at the personal level. So for you, how can you be an agent of change in this arena? And I think there are three really important areas. One is to just really leverage what we have, existing resources and reward structures. Think big. Big ideas are free. Ask for help that might already exist for identifying potential resources to get your project going. That could be a development officer or, oops, I'm sorry. a development officer, or someone in your Office of Research. You can also connect with potential collaborators from outside your usual sphere that might help you tap into new resources, and learn how to talk about the win-win-win-win, which I'm counting as those 4 different areas of activities that we defined the Living Lab with, saying how Living Labs help you win in the area of education, in research, in operations to reduce fossil use, and at the organizational level. And then finally, use your power strategically. So set up deliberative and inclusive decision-making processes when you're the one in charge. Help to change the culture of your organization to make these things more possible. Think broadly and inclusively when you're putting together teams. And when you have the chance, use your win-win-win-win talk to advocate for change. And then the last part, preparing yourself for diverse collaborations. Develop your skills in that area. One key challenge is transparency. Set yourself up with the system for documenting things that would be useful for promoting transparency on your projects. Plan ahead about decision-making, how your group will do that, and plan to monitor how everyone in your group is doing and how the group is doing as a whole. I'm going to skip past this because we are running short on time, but I wanted to just mention that later today, we're going to talk a little bit about, imagine that we don't have these barriers. What are these really cool projects that we could do on our campuses? I like this one related to optimizing building space use. These slides will be available if you want to read a little bit more about that. And there are also in the Sprint project, lots of ideas for grant opportunities to tap into to make these kinds of projects more possible through the intersection of the fossil-free goals with some other goals that you might have. And then finally, preparing yourself as a catalyst. A lot of decisions are made either based on majority vote or consensus-based decision-making. I won't go into detail about that here. Those both have their problems, especially when it comes to inclusivity. But there are other ways to make decisions. And I recommend learning a little bit more about consent-based decision-making, where everyone identifies a personal preference, but also a range of tolerance, things they would be okay with, and objections. So, you know, it might be where you're going to spend this extra budget that you have in your project. You might have a group of people, let's say 5 people, who all have ideas about where to spend the budget. You come up with 10 ideas. Those things can be really divisive sometimes if there's not a structure, but see right away that in this scenario, you can find a solution very quickly that everyone either likes or is okay with, or you can find which decision you might, or which possible spending you might want to do. There's only one person objecting. Maybe there's a reason for more discussion on that topic. We will have a fun discussion this afternoon where you can share your own no barriers ideas for Living Labs. Think about some things about how to plan a diverse Living Labs team and practice a couple of strategies that we think are useful and plan for diversity, equity, and inclusion in your projects. And that's everything. I welcome questions or comments in the last couple of minutes.
Thanks a lot. Stacy, thank you so much. We have a few minutes for Q&A. So if you have a question for Stacy, please put it in the Q&A box. I don't see any yet, but maybe Stacy, am I looking? Sherry, am I looking in the right place? I'm looking for questions.
I don't see any at this time.
Okay.
All right. I also welcome corrections. If you're here and I talked about your project and you want to add some context, please give those corrections as well. Oh,
it looks like the host has turned off Q&A. So for some reason, we have to try to fix that. Because if you have something you'd like for the moment, you could throw it in the chat and I'll see if I can look at it. But otherwise, we'll use the Q&A while Sherry's trying to fix the Q&A. Give us just a minute. Sorry about that, guys. So in just a few minutes, we're gonna I'll start talking about the next session, although we will hopefully get that fixed. Give me just a second here. Okay, now it should be working. So if you have questions, questions you wanted, please type them in the box, and I'll just, while we're waiting for that to come up and running, I will talk about the next session. So on the agenda next, we have fossil-free living lab examples, and that's going to, I think Matt is going to, he's going to moderate that, Matt Sinclair. Okay, just a second here. Oh, okay, so this is just for Stacy, where the Q&A is working now. Stacy, can you comment on Living Lab as a communication strategy for a university?
Yes, hi, Roger. So Living Labs provide a variety of communication strategies for the university. I think that the typical roles of education and research in communication with society more broadly, either through like training that students get on campus or through the research that is produced on campus, is something that Living Labs produce novel content for. But they have the potential to go beyond that, partly because of this focus on real-world experiments and access to different audiences than the typical audiences for the kind of work that's going on. I would say also that communication is an opportunity for Living Labs at the internal level. So a way to help organize discussion around decisions that are being made within the university. So this is not so much external, but internal communication. They provide a locus for discussing or sharing information about these important decisions being made at universities.